Greetings, I'm Rob Ferguson, owner of the Ferguson Funeral Home, and we invite you to share with us as we celebrate 125 years as Scottdale's oldest business. In 1974, Scottdale's Centennial Committee acknowledged our business as being a pioneer in the development of our town. I'm the sixth owner and the fourth generation of the Ferguson family to serve as proprietor. The story and history of our firm dates back to America's saddest struggle, the Civil War. Little did young Samuel D. Altman surmise that his service to his country during the Civil War as a member of the Grand Army of the Republic would lead to a career in funeral service. Nor did he foresee himself as a pioneer of embalming techniques and a proprietor of a business whose legacy continues until this day. In 1861, 4 days after his 16th birthday, the Civil War began. His skills in mortuary science were forged in the heat of battle as he worked as a Union Army field mortuary technician. In the worst conditions, Samuel labored in tents set up at the sites of battles to prepare the soldiers for burial back home. The Union Army saw 365,000 of their young boys die in battle.
I remember April the 14th, 1865. We received word the end of the war was upon us. I couldn't wait to return to my beloved home near Fountain Mills, Pennsylvania. I heard its industry was growing strong at home, and I have dreamt about opening an undertaking and furniture store there, especially since I had all the skills necessary and I knew I could make the business work.
Samuel D. Altman, SD as he was called, survived the war and came home to picturesque Fountain Mills and Lalks Farm, present-day Scottdale. In 1874, 9 years after the end of the Civil War, Lalks Farm and Homestead was incorporated as the town of Scottdale and eventually absorbed Fountain Mills into the community as well. Scottdale, by the way, was named for Colonel Thomas Alexander Scott, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad and also a Civil War hero. SD worked as a carpenter, building the large homes in this area until he was financially stable. He could then use his war-forged skills as a mortician to realize his dream. In 1880, he set up a business for funerals, embalming, home viewings, and cemetery detail, and served the Scottdale community for close 20 years. At the age of 54, Samuel D. Altman sold his established business to J. Patrick Owens. They had developed a mutual respect for one another, serving together on the board of the Scottdale Building and Loan Association. In 1899, J. Patrick Owens, a community activist, purchased and began the Owens Undertaking and Livery Service. He had been serving the community of Scottdale as postmaster since 1886 when appointed by President Cleveland. His zeal was to formulate the town of Scottdale into a thriving and engaging community where businesses flourished and people had good standards of living.
Scottdale was flourishing, and just about any legitimate business could do well. It seemed as though every street had a watchmaker or hotel. I remember 1902 like it was yesterday. The members of the Elks Lodge 777 raised me to the position of Grand Exalted Ruler. What a great fraternity it was to belong to, along with the Knights of Columbus. Each day on the streets of our fair city, or perhaps at Coon's Grocery, someone would comment to me about my stature in these fraternities. I truly loved this town, a slice of heaven here on earth.
Shortly after the turn of the century, Mr. Owens met young William Ferguson, who was general foreman at the town's casket factory. Seeing Mr. Ferguson's potential, Owens offered him an opportunity in a business partnership. In 1901, the Owens and Ferguson Furniture and Undertaking establishment was born.
Each year during the July 4th festivities, our Owens Ferguson Furniture and Undertaking float was the hit of the parade. We were dedicated to the business and were really operating two businesses in one. Along with my lodge dealings and community involvements, it seemed we never slowed down. That was until the day I came down with the flu, in December of 1903. William Ferguson and I were immediately summoned to the site of a train disaster. They said it was coming from Pittsburgh, crashed, and the boiler blew between Leighton and Dawson. All the undertakers from our area were on hand and worked in the pouring rain. When we arrived, the fellows from Connellsville were placing the body of Father Finello, pastor of Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church, into a casket for transfer. He was scalded to death. On his way back with toys for the kids, he was. It was Christmas, you know. So many dead. William and I worked day and night, and the rain never seemed to stop. William never complained, but I asked him to go back to tend to the business. I started feeling ill, but I stayed on for a few more days. Coming home, I knew I'd caught something serious. Turns out, it was the worst flu I'd ever known, and it wouldn't go away. My energy was spent, and I stayed at home to rest. The doctor said I was suffering with a bout of lobar pneumonia. He said if I kept working, it would spread to the blood and lungs. What an awful shame.
Around 1910, J. Patrick Owens, finding himself in such a weakened state due to his illness and the rigors of his business, was forced to retire and sell out to his business partner, his loyal friend, William Ferguson. A Scottish-born immigrant, Ferguson found himself the new sole proprietor of the Ferguson Undertaking and Furniture Store at the age of 41. Within the next few years, he brought his sons George and John on board to help run the firm.
I remember a lady who lived next door to the funeral home here by the name of Thompson, and her son used to help me some make ambulance trips and help around the funeral home. And she told me when her father died, they buried him over at the Chestnut Hill Cemetery in Connellsville, which was out on Wills Road, and they drove with the horses down through Everson and Owensdale and up across the Narrows and went into Connellsville that way. And it was a 3-hour trip from Scottdale to Connellsville with the horses, and they'd have to stop and rest the horses. And she said that at one point when they got up on the Narrows, the horses had been frothing at the mouth, that it actually, the moisture froze, and Granddad Ferguson wouldn't allow the horses to continue until he went up, and she said, put claws around their face so that the moisture would melt off of their horse's mouth and that before they would continue on to the Chestnut Hill Cemetery.
Growing up in Ayrshire, Scotland, William Ferguson and his pals spent their time whittling wood into flutes, knives, and decorations. Immigrating to America, William was a first-rate cabinet maker that easily found his trade. Many of our furnishings displayed here at the funeral home were handmade by my great-grandfather William.
Grandpap Ferguson, of course, worked at the planing mill, which is the old U.S. casket company on North Broadway, and it's my understanding that he gained an acquaintance with Patrick Owens, who was the old-time livery and undertaker in town, and through their friendship, eventually involved that Granddad left the casket factory and went to embalming school in Chicago for a period, I believe, of 6 weeks at that time for training. and came back, and he and Mr. Owens then formed a partnership shortly thereafter. It became known as Owens and Ferguson in town.
At that point, William Ferguson was not only a skilled craftsman, but a licensed undertaker. His furniture and glue making was known throughout the region. As an artist, his passion was to construct grandfather clocks. His ornate clocks today keep great time in the Ferguson Funeral Home.
To me, it was the best of both worlds. On the one hand, I was able to care for families and provide a service to the community. On the other, I was able to use my God-given talents to take a tree and turn it into an archway, a table, a grandfather clock, or something else. I could always tell if someone used my tools while I was away, even if they put them back exactly where I left them. My boys, George and John, work hard around here. At business, they're great, but woodworking never rubbed off on them.
William's woodworking abilities never rubbed off, but his business sense did. His son George, working at his side for nearly 3 decades, had the incredible foresight to foresee the need for change in home viewing settings, and funeral homes as we know them today would be needed. What a radical notion! Nothing like this had ever been attempted before in this part of the country. George, still working for his father, had to convince him that innovation was necessary. After many years of planting seeds of change, William finally relented, and the plans for the Ferguson Funeral Home were finally drawn up.
These are the first blueprinted funeral home drawings east of the Mississippi. We constructed the funeral home on Spring Street, and my vision for change finally came to fruition. Unfortunately, the public was slow to change their customs. Even though the building was built in 1936, the business was still operated out of the old furniture store. It appears as though Father's reservations were founded.
They didn't do any embalming here. They did the embalming in the old warehouse down there on the second floor. They had an embalming room there, and that's where they did the embalming. They did no embalming here. And there was very few layouts here. Most of the people wanted to be laid out at the homes, like they had always been.
Tragically, neither William or George would live to see this innovation fulfill its purpose. William died New Year's Day, 1951, several years before the Ferguson Funeral Home was regularly used. Then, only a year and 10 days later, in 1952, tragedy struck again.
All the funeral homes back in that period of time pretty much had an ambulance service, and Dad was on an ambulance call out on the Scottdale-Smithton Road. It was on a Thursday afternoon, and it was in January, I believe it was January the 10th, and he had driven out there, and they had picked up this patient who was injured and was bringing him back, going to cut across, I presume, through Alberton to go to the old Mount Pleasant Hospital, and he had a stroke at the wheel of the ambulance out on an area which we refer to as where Clement's Garage is now today, and the ambulance, of course, crashed, and through the injuries from the accident and also from the stroke, Dad only lived 2 days. He died, I believe, on a Saturday evening, January the 12th.
It was a struggle. It was hard. Our business dropped off quite a bit during that time, but we struggled, and we kept it afloat. We wanted to keep it going. We wanted to keep it going from a brother.
This indeed was a sad chapter in the history of the Ferguson Funeral Home. George's wife Nellie took over and operated the firm under a widow's license until George's son Robert became licensed and operated the business.
I received my license in the early part of 1957, and of course continued as Mother's supervisor, so to speak, until I believe it was 1964. And at that time, then I took over the operation myself here, and my mother then passed away in 1966. And I operated the firm then from that period through the end of 1992, at which time my son, Rob Ferguson, assumed ownership, and is he's the owner, of course, today and operating the firm.
With his mentors gone and the business not doing well, my father faced great challenges. By the mid-1960s, he had not only stabilized his base of clientele, purchased the business from his family, but had also taken a seat in the public service sector of his community.
I think our business, having survived all these years, 125 years, certainly speaks, I believe, well for our involvement with the community. I think we wouldn't be here today if we haven't served families for generations, and that, of course, speaks well. If you have families coming back to you, you must be doing something right.
Doing something right indeed. Dad supported his family in the residence above the funeral home and involved his sons in church, school, scouts, and YMCA activities. Vacations were few and far between as the sole proprietor duties of the business drew him back at its beck and call. My father is still committed to serving the community on the board of Scottdale Bank, and after 34 years, he is the longest standing board member. Following my father's retirement in 1992, I purchased the Ferguson Funeral Home and became the fourth generation of the Ferguson family to operate in this region. A legacy of caring and commitment that started in 1880 with Samuel D. Altman. To our amazement, the Altman and Ferguson families are connected. We recently discovered that Sally Moomaw Ferguson, wife of William Ferguson, had a first cousin, David Moomaw, who married the sister of Samuel D. Altman, Susanna Altman. Thus, the legacy and history of the 125 years of our firm is connected from founder to my family. This 1880 Rock Falls horse-drawn hearse is on display in the carriage house adjacent to the Ferguson Funeral Home for the public to see at any time. It's similar to the one that Samuel D. Altman used when he began this business in 1880. Mr. Altman began using the rectangular four-poster horse-drawn hearse, and in doing so, he revolutionized the hearse building industry for the last quarter of the 19th century. SD innovated to show even more respect to the deceased and to their families. This legacy has continued through the years, even into this day. Shortly after my wife Rhonda and I took over the reins of Scottdale's oldest business, we enhanced the type of service that we offer to the families of Scottdale. Today, you can customize your funeral service from a broad range of personalized choices. These include cremation, personalized caskets that reflect the personality of the deceased, and alternative customs. You and your family are invited to visit the Ferguson Funeral Home to see its history in the furniture, clocks, and horse-drawn hearse. I hope you have enjoyed our 125-year history, and it is our hope to serve this region for many more decades to come. If you would like to learn more about our services, including pre-planning, click the pre-planning icon on our DVD. We want to thank you and invite you to visit the home that Service built.
We have families here that we've worked for 3, 4, 5 generations, and as you look back through the history over the thousands of funerals that have been conducted by the firm, that certainly we've look upon it with pride, no question about it. Just to the extent that 125 years is quite a milestone in the community, and being the longest standing business right now in the community. We've seen a lot of water over the dam over the years, and hopefully that will continue for several years to come.